everybody. Welcome to Whisked, stirring up conversations in the shared kitchen industry, a monthly series where we sit down with the operators, partners, and food system leaders shaping the shared kitchen world. I'm Tyler, Director of Special Projects at the Food Corridor, the leading management software for shared kitchens. Through our department, Kitchen EDU, we support shared kitchens with tools, education, and resources to help them operate sustainably and grow with intention. Each month, we're digging into real conversations about what's working, what's challenging, and what shared kitchen operators need to know to better support the food businesses they serve. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sarah Delevan, the founder of Good Food CFO, where she works with purpose-driven food businesses to build financial strategies that actually fit the way they operate. Today, we're bringing her perspective to the shared kitchen world and talking pricing, financial health, and what it really looks like to run a mission-driven business without running it into the ground. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and the Good Food CFO origin story.
You got it. I'll try to be as succinct as possible because it's a bit of a long story. As you said, my name is Sarah. I have been in the local and sustainable food industry here in Southern California for, almost 20 years, which is crazy to say. I started my work in food after struggling with acne for my teenage years into young adulthood. And I met a dermatologist when I moved to Los Angeles who said, "What are you eating?" There were just some things that weren't right for me and my body. And it sent me on a really interesting journey about understanding food and where our food comes from. I read Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma at the same time, and it just sent me to the local farmers market. And I just thought, this is my purpose in life. I need to support local farmers, regional farmers, and folks who are creating food outside of the larger food industry, if you will. And I really dedicated my life to that through volunteer work initially, and then started managing farmers markets and eventually co-launched a good food business, as I call it, with the co-founder. We were sourcing amazing produce, meat, seafood, dairy, artisan made goods and selling them through our pop-up and our delivery services for just over 2 years. And we were so successful from the outside, had like growing revenue. We had customers who just were coming back to us week after week. Our client list was growing and we were not making any money. And our debt was getting like higher and higher. And we just were racking our brains constantly analyzing the strategy that we were implementing and following. And we really felt like we're doing everything right. We're doing everything the way that we understand we're supposed to. Why isn't this working? We worked harder, we did more, and the outcomes never really got any better. And so we ended up closing our business after, like I said, just about 2 years. And it was after that that I really started to see, because I had experienced it myself, that there were other food businesses like ours that were thriving, it seemed like, that had amazing products, like dedicated customers, and they were closing their doors. And it was because they couldn't make the financials work. Longer story, a little bit shorter. I went on to become a buyer for a really large catering company here in LA who had extremely wonderful sourcing criteria. And my job there was to stick to a 30% food cost and buy the best produce and ingredients that I could possibly find. And I was very good at my job. But despite making a lot of money in terms of revenue, they struggled with cash flow. And I said to the one co-founder, what if I spent less? What if our food costs were 28%? Based on how much revenue we're making, that's a significant amount of savings that could then be spread around to pay the bills and help cash flow. He was like, in between your sourcing responsibilities, if you want to work on that project, go for it. And we did, and it worked. And so from there, I tiptoed after leaving that job into consulting, and I have literally been doing it ever since. So that's like the long, sort of origin story of how we got here. But I love to share that because it's important to me to let people know that it's really rooted in supporting local and regional food systems, supporting independent food brands, and helping each founder and each business find their way to profitability and sustainability that's really unique to their specific business.
Yeah, I love that. What a great story. So I want to get right into it then. When a shared kitchen operator wants to understand their business's financial health, where do they start? What are the first numbers that actually matter that they should examine?
I love this question because there is one metric that really is a predictor of financial cash flow, of your profitability, and also how much or how little you'll have to rely on outside cash to operate your business. And that is your gross profit margins. And so we start at the product level. So really understanding every product that you make, what is the gross profit margin for that product? Because there's been a longstanding belief across the food industry that 50% is the quote unquote good margin. And what 50% means essentially is that you can produce one more unit of product with the profit that you make from the sale of that first product. Anything above 50% gives us enough profit to make another unit and then some. Anything below 50% is not quite enough to make that next unit of product. And once founders really understand that and then understand, okay, if I'm having to kind of borrow from my bank account or borrow from my operating expense bucket, if you will, to continue to make products, I can see how I might run into some cash flow issues or might need to get some outside funding or utilize some debt to grow my business. And so we always start with product profit margin and then kind of look at sales channel margin and then overall business margins to really help founders understand what does their business look like and do they need to make some changes to improve cash flow and finances.
Yeah, definitely. And so with shared kitchens, their products are their spaces and their storage and the time within the kitchen. And when they're thinking about their cash flow, a lot of that is, there's different types of memberships that and billing plans that shared kitchens can offer, hourly, monthly tiered plans. And when those plans get paid out, directly impacts their cash flow and what they have. And so when operators are evaluating those billing models that they have existing in their kitchen, what should they be thinking about with whether or not those numbers are actually working for
Mhm.
them, and if it's time to raise the prices, how do you approach that conversation with your member base? Like, things are gonna get more expensive here for you because we're not financially sustainable right now.
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting question because when it comes to, like, you kind of mentioned an element of cash flow, right? Like the timing of when payments come in, the amount of money that's coming in. I also think there's probably an element of how full your kitchen is, right? How much like underutilized or unutilized
Yes.
time they're in. And so you want to think about that, right? Like what's the minimum that you like a minimum capacity that you can have versus what is it like when it's full. I love cash flow modeling, which sounds like a complex thing, but it's really, really not. And understanding, I think number one is what are my expenses month to month? Like, what are these costs that are not going to change that I have to cover regardless of how many businesses are utilizing my kitchen? Really understanding that, understanding what that minimum occupancy, I'll call it, rate is or number is in order to cover those expenses. And just, I think it, without getting into too much detail, because it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I think that's where I would start. And then understanding typically how many folks do you have in the kitchen? We always, I think, no matter what kind of business, you're running, you want to have a bit of what we call a cash runway, which means if I didn't sell anything for the next month, let's say,
Mm.
how long would my money last me? And if you're running an operation where you're literally like a paycheck to paycheck or month to month, or you're running that account down to zero, then you probably want to consider raising your rates. And you want it to be reasonable though, because I think with shared kitchens, you're typically working with young food businesses, right? Or early stage food
Sure.
businesses. So you
Yes.
also want to take that into consideration as well, because those founders need to have an affordable and approachable rent price. Otherwise, it can be detrimental to their business,
Mhm.
which in turn becomes detrimental to your business because they can no
Yep.
longer pay the rent, right?
Yes,
So
it's
it's
very mutually dependent.
yeah. But I think, again, to kind of just answer your question more clearly, is really understand what does this operation cost me? And what is that minimum number? If you have to have a full capacity for like rental kitchen to cover your expenses, that's not great,
Mhm.
right? And so what is that sweet spot and like kind of where do you need to be to have a healthy business without constantly needing to be at 100%?
Yeah, definitely. And what would your advice be to these operators on communicating that need for an increase in rates to them? Because as you mentioned, this is now going to affect that food business's P&L. And what can those operators do to kind of coach those food businesses to accommodate for this additional expense that's now going to be on their fixed line?
Yeah. I think whenever it comes to pricing conversation, hopefully, I always say, hopefully you have a good relationship with your customers, right? Which in this case are the food brands. And if you do, then I think you can have a relatively open conversation with them. We want to continue to serve you. And in order to continue to serve you, we need to increase these prices. And really giving them a true reason, right, of why this increase is happening. I think giving folks a time frame, like the worst thing I think you can do to a food brand is say your costs are going up tomorrow, or your costs are going up at the first of like the month, right, which is like 15 to 30 days away. I think giving people some advance notice is a wonderful thing to do because then they can plan or adjust. Excuse me, they can plan or adjust for that change. They can also make a judgment call of whether they're not going to be able to maintain that cost, like
Mm.
whether they will be or not. Because if they need to move on, then that's something that you both want to know, right? Like in advance of that big change happening. But overall, I think transparency, especially like among small businesses, is a really wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. And putting it into frame that they can understand too. Like as a food business, you have to be able to ebb and flow with rising costs of your product, of your packaging, of everything going
Yeah.
on. And so it sometimes can be a harsh but necessary lesson for new businesses to learn too. And these operators can really help usher them through that process and mitigation.
Yeah.
Uh, and many shared kitchens open because somebody identified a need in their community. And that community mindset and providing a low barrier entry to market for food entrepreneurs becomes their purpose, which can sometimes villainize profit in exchange for that support that they're providing.
Yeah.
So, what is the most useful way to reframe these mission-driven operators who feel like financial discipline is in tension with their values?
This is such a great question because whether you are the kitchen operator or the food business, right, operating within the kitchen, I think my answer is the same for you. You cannot achieve your mission without financial sustainability and profitability. Bottom line. There is an amazing woman. Her name is Kat Fields White. She is the founder of Farmers Market Pros and the Intense Conference. I'm a huge fan of hers.
You love
We
cat?
yeah, okay. So Pat always talked about like purpose, meaning and profit, right? Where purpose and profit come together. I think, this was true for me when I had my business. We felt guilty making money or being profitable or charging quote unquote too much for our products. But at the end of the day, not charging what in hindsight we really needed to charge to stay in business meant our business closed.
Mm,
And so, as you pointed out, as an operator, you created the shared space because there was a need in your community. If you are not profitable, if you're not able to pay yourself a fair wage, if you're not able to pay your team, if you're not able to keep the kitchen in top performing condition, you're not meeting the needs of the community that you launched this business to serve. And I hope that if we think about it this way, it's almost like put your oxygen mask on first, right, before you help others. Same kind of idea. And again, if you're transparent and if you really are taking care of your founders by way of the rates that you're charging them, they're going to see that. And it's going to be, I think, a really positive relationship.
mhm. Yeah. And I wanna go back to something that you mentioned is your time, the entrepreneur's time, and I think this is something all entrepreneurs struggle with is valuing and putting a dollar amount on your time and paying yourself. So how do you coach business owners to value their time and to pay themselves.
Yeah. This is the hardest thing. I'm gonna call out Kat again because in my early days of my consulting business, Kat was like, "How much are you paying yourself? Make sure you're paying yourself enough." I, at a bare minimum, say to the founders that I work with, "What is the minimum wage requirement in your state or city?" Start there. It's like, so if there is some level of guilt in paying yourself or some like idea that you have in your head, which so many entrepreneurs have, like, well, I'm not supposed to make any money in the first 2 years. No, 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 no. Not all of us who start businesses have cushiony bank accounts where we cannot pay ourselves, right, for some amount of time. But also, you're not seeing realistic business numbers if you are doing work and not paying yourself. So I always just say, darn it, minimum wage, because that's the minimum requirement for where you live, right? And from there, as your business is growing, you can start to grow that as well. Another philosophy that I did use early on, and I've kind of gotten away from for food businesses, but I think it could potentially work for shared kitchen operators. It's sort of that profit first idea where you carve out a certain percentage of your revenue that gets put into a bucket that will be used to pay yourself as the owner. And so I did this in sort of the earlier days of my business where let's say 10% of my revenue would go in bucket. Now I might only take out the equivalent of 5% for a little while to maybe pay that minimum wage for myself. But then as that bucket got bigger, I raised my rate to myself. Said, okay, well, there's enough money there that I can pay myself a bit more and I can keep putting in that 10% and that bucket will grow and will be good. That is sometimes a good method for people to feel okay taking money from their business. You might want that bucket to kind of build up a little bit and see that everything's okay financially and then start taking that money out. Alternatively, you might put that 10% away and go, well, gosh, I need that 10% to operate the business. And if that's the case, that's a sign to raise your rate.
Can't pay yourself, you need to increase
Mhm.
your prices.
Yep.
So I want to get into a little bit more on the food business side because many shared kitchen operators are mentors and advisors and have incubation programs for the food businesses working with inside their kitchens. And a lot of the food businesses are chefs or don't have formal financial background. They're creative people. And often the creative side and the financial acumen don't go together or they want to fight with one another. What role can operators realistically play in helping a member food business get financially grounded?
Gosh, that's such a great question. We at the Good Food CFO, we do work with a few shared kitchens that are incubators and they're doing amazing work. I'll just kind of speak to some examples of offering coaching and guidance to their founders. And in some cases, they're using our software as what I call that common language, where everyone's using the same cost calculator. Everyone's using the same forecasting tools and the same tools to understand what their P&Ls are saying. It, in a way, just sort of helps everyone to, again, speak the same language. And when you hear that, like one founder being coached, all the other founders can kind of take that information and apply it to their own business, right? Because they're looking at the same structure and setup. But I think, just like what we were saying to the operators themselves, it's important to be grounded in some way in your finances because that's what enables you to keep on going, right? And to achieve your mission. I've had some founders, particularly the ones that I've worked for as a full time employee, but in the financial space when I was at the catering company, I was both resourcing and financial management, which was really interesting. And I would say, like, you can't spend money on that. Like, you can't have that X, Y, Z. And it would frustrate the chef at first, but then they would get extra creative because they had these boundaries that they needed to and wanted to really succeed and create something beautiful in. And so I think to call out one thing, some people think if I pay too much attention to the finances, I will lose my ability to be creative. And I actually think it's quite the opposite of that. And when you really know what's going on in your finances and you spend honestly 15 minutes a week looking at them, you can do some really wonderful, beautiful, and creative things as a result.
Mhm. So I have a couple of follow-up questions, but first, you mentioned your software. Can you talk a little bit about what your platform does and how you can help food businesses understand their finances better?
Yeah, for sure. So the Good Food CFO software was created to help food businesses create financial strategies. So that goes back to step number one. What are my product margins, right? Am I selling my products at a price where I can actually create a financially successful, sustainable, profitable business? And we sort that out first. And then with that information, we then can create plans for how we want to grow. The word forecasting has, over the past like 10 years, scared the heck out of every single founder that I've ever worked with. There's maybe been like one or two that are like, yeah, that's so excited to do forecasting. Most of the time, founders are scared. They think like, I don't know what to put down on the paper. I'm just guessing, and how would I even come up with it? Or I don't have time to do it. And they, even with my help, would be really, really frightened to do it. So how we frame it in the software is by way of growth scenarios. And the idea there is to take the pressure off of getting it right and instead to think about how you might want to grow your business. Maybe you have a food truck and you're thinking, daydreaming about opening a brick and mortar. Run the numbers. See what it looks like. What do you think it would cost to rent a space in your area? How many, dishes do you think you might be able to sell in a just run the scenario and see what it looks like. Maybe you have a product that you're selling at farmers markets and you're thinking about, gosh, I'd really love to get into retail stores. We have the tools inside the software to help you brainstorm that idea and see what that might look like over the next 12 months so that you can see things like how many, units would you have to sell to hit a certain revenue number? What would your gross profit margins be when you sold into that channel? How much funding you might need from either your savings account or an outside fund to achieve that goal? The objective is really to help founders see where they are now and look at different pathways for what they might want to create in the future, and then they can take action in actually getting there. And the software has a lot of different components. We start with the product costing, which a lot of people do on like the back of a napkin or a piece of paper, right? We bring that into the software. So then you can do your pricing across all sales channels right inside the software. And every single section of the software speaks to one another. So, for example, if you've made a growth scenario and a projection, and suddenly your costs change on one of your important ingredients, you change one number and you see a reflection of that change across the board. So it's not only about planning, but it's also about keeping an eye on how are things going in my business so that you can make sure you're staying on track. And if something's getting off track, you're made aware and you can correct it and get back on track quickly.
Yeah, I love that because it takes the you know, the burden of having to think about, "Oh, I need to go and put my new invoice number into this sheet, and I need to do
Yeah.
this, every so often," and I think sometimes, people get lost so much in the day-to-day of their business that they forget to go back and look at the changes in their books. They're just paying invoices and getting the ingredients and doing those emergency runs to, Costco or whatever,
Yep.
where you're paying more and you're not accounting for it. Um,
Yeah.
and so, with all of those variables, how often should founders be sitting down with their books and comparing where their forecasting or scenarios are up against their actuals?
So I recommend people do it once a month. And so we've actually built that into the software too. So when you create your growth scenario and you're like, okay, this is the one, this is what I want to strive to reach this year. You activate it, literally hit a little button, turns it green. And then you have a dashboard where once a month you can either sync your QuickBooks or upload your P&L if you're not a QuickBooks user and actually see, okay, here's what my plan was and here's what my actuals are. And we've really summarized it. I know there are so many founders who are like, I looking at my P&L line by line, like my eyes go cross. What am I even supposed to be gathering from this? Right. So years ago, we developed a format and a system where it's like, we're just going to pull the most important things for you. What's your gross profit margin? What are your sales by channel? What was your revenue supposed to be? What was it actually? What are your costs of goods sold? Right. So we're pulling out the sort of most important summarized information So you can see side by side once a month, where am I compared to where I want it to be? And soon, I think shortly after, maybe in a month or so, we're hoping for May release on this, but you'll actually be able to go in weekly and see, where's my revenue this week? Where are my expenses this week? Because I think retroactive looking, you can learn a lot from. But if you can actually go in real time on a Monday morning or a Friday morning, whenever it works best for you, with maybe your favorite coffee or tea. I always like to make a moment out of it. You think your finances and you can go, okay, this is where I am. Because if you're 50% of the way through the month and you haven't made it to 50% of your revenue goal, I want you to see that. I want you to get a little fire under your tail and go, okay, I have some ground that I need to make up. I can do that. If your labor costs or your cogs are like higher than they're supposed to be halfway through the month, I want you to see that so you can go, where can I save? What can I utilize that I already have in my kitchen and turn that into revenue instead of going to buy more? So it's really, I think weekly is amazing. And that's what we're striving for in the software, because it puts you in the driver's seat of your business. And I think, to your point, kind of shakes you out of the day to day and just, these are the things I have to do. And I want people to kind of get excited about having control in their
Mhm.
business and being able to direct it. And I want to add this too, that there's a staggering fact around independent food businesses. And I think this is important for food brands and businesses as well as the shared kitchen operators. More than 70% of independent food brands fail within the first 2 to 5 years of existing. And primarily the reason they fail is because they run out of money. Big mission, we keep these independent brands in business because as consumers, we want them, we need them. As parts of our local economies, we want them and need them, right? Like, they make us stronger as communities. And it also fights corporate consolidation in our greater food industry. And so it just makes me so excited and like really proud to have this software and to be able to create tools that are going to continuously help founders and kitchen operators be successful, right? Long term, help the brands in their kitchen to change our food industry and feed more people really good food.
Yeah, I love that. And you're developing a more of a routine with them using this of checking in with your finances often. You check in with your suppliers and your farmers with what's available this week. Check in with your business plan and your finances and see where
Yeah.
you are. And as you mentioned, checking it earlier in the month versus the end of the month, that gives you time to course correct and
Yeah.
react to something. You mentioned sales channels, and I'm wondering, when food businesses and shared kitchen operators can look at this too, what
Yeah.
buckets are bringing in the most money within your
Yeah.
operation? But with food businesses specifically, when they're looking at their product and profitability by sales channel, you can really see where your high performers are and maybe where something just isn't hitting the way that you thought it would. What At what point should a food business owner cut off a sales channel and direct that energy towards somewhere that is performing better?
That's a great question. I feel like I feel like telling people like, we did not talk before this. But you're like teeing up the things that we're working to create inside the software. So one of the biggest questions that we get from founders is exactly that. Should I keep selling in this particular sales channel? And how do I figure that out? And so one of the things we're building is the ability to categorize your expenses in our software by sales channel. So let's say you're selling at farmers markets and you've got farmers market fees and you've got farmers market staff and you've got certain permits and licenses. And we want to track all of those expenses specific to farmers market. And then we can also see our farmers market revenue and the cost of goods sold for our products in farmers market. With that information, it's not only how much revenue are we making, but what is the profitability of this channel? Because here's the crazy thing. The crazy thing is that your highest revenue generating channel might be your least profitable. And that matters more than how much money you're making on what we call the top line. So I've had lots of founders come through and say, Sarah, I'm not sure if I should keep doing farmers markets. We, in theory, have a really high margin in that channel because we're selling directly to our consumers, but it just feels like we're not selling enough. And when we analyze those numbers, we can see that in fact, the farmers market is their lowest profitability channel. And for that reason, we say, let it go. Because even if it's generating a lot of revenue, that revenue is not turning into actual money you can use in your business. That matters. And so in many instances, we're keeping the quote unquote lower performing channels in terms of revenue because we're actually getting to keep more of those revenue dollars in the business. And so we're working on building out that feature right now in the software. So you can run a report and say, how am I performing across my channels? And which ones should I be dedicating like time and effort into growing?
I love that. That's so exciting. You're making it so easy. I mean, the business owners aren't gonna have to think about this. They just have to log on and upload their invoices and see everything right there.
Well, I have to say, like, I've been doing this for more than 10 years now, and I did it one on one as a fractional CFO for most of that time. And even I was frustrated with the process of pulling this information together for my clients, right? In the beginning, it's like it's exciting. I have custom spreadsheets for all of you. And then over the years, it's like, gosh, I'm still doing this. Like, I'm still, like, no wonder people are willing to pay me to do it for them because it takes time to pull the P&L, put your actuals next to your projections, do the nitty gritty calculations to figure out how profitable are each of my sales channels. It's like, no wonder people aren't looking at this on a regular basis. As you said, there's so much to do for a food founder.
Mhm.
The time to sit down and spend an hour or hours really digging into the number, it just doesn't exist. So after 10 years, I know not only what people should be looking at, but also what people want to be looking at. And I've had a lot of time to dream of how we might be able to make these things come to fruition in a software. And I have an amazing developer named Kyle who takes all of my very specific ideas and turns them into reality.
Yep, that's great. Do you see a common mistake that food business founders make with their finances? Yes,
I do. Yep.
tell us.
I'm gonna say that it's the scale and volume idea. Um, Oftentimes, if I ask a founder, like, what are your margins? They always start with product margins and then channel margins. They'll say they're good. And I'll say, what is good? And they'll say, well, they're like around 50%. Okay. Or they might say, well, maybe they're low, maybe they're 40%, but I'll be able to make money when I scale. And here's the problem with that idea most of the time is that the founder is not wrong in that no matter what your margins are, at some point you can tip the scale to be cash flow positive. But as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, when you have margins that are lower than 40%, to grow a business is going to take more money than if you had a product and sales channel margins that are, let's say, 60% or higher, right? So the main, like the common thing that people kind of get wrong, if you will, and they don't know at what level, right? What point that quote unquote scaling actually creates a change in their business. They don't know how many units they are going to need to sell. They don't know how long it's going to take to get there. And they don't know how much money it's going to take to get there. Thinking back on our business, as I often do, that my food business, we had no idea how long that scaling was going to happen. All we could see in the day to day was our debt is getting bigger.
Mhm.
And even though our revenue is getting bigger, it doesn't seem like things are moving in the right direction overall. And we haven't been able to pay ourselves. So without knowing when is that tipping point, we had to walk away. On the flip side, you find some other founders who are like, I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to mortgage my house. I'm going to take on as much debt as I possibly can to get there. And they might be really far away from that tipping point. So I think knowing that, yes, scaling and volume and growth is going to help your business someday. But what is that point? And how long is it going to take you to get there? And how much money will it take? Because then you have the ability to say, I can afford that. I can't afford that. And what do I want to do if I can't afford that? Increase my prices, change my strategy. Again, puts you in control and in the driver's seat of changing your business so that it works for you.
Mhm. Yep, and so many, I think, too, food business owners think that all I need is that one big distribution deal, and I got it, I'm made. But without realizing that you most likely have to produce that large order before you receive payment.
Yeah, a
And
while before
so
you receive payment.
so how long can you go? 1, can you fulfill the order without
Yeah.
any kind of payment? And how long can you go until you receive that check after. And that's something a lot of people don't realize or think about and consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have a whole separate conversation about that. And we'll save that for another day.
Sounds good.
So when a shared kitchen operator sees one of their food businesses who is clearly underpricing or overextending or, heading down a path of failure,
Yeah.
what is actually helpful to say versus what tends to land wrong with founders?
Mm. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can answer this question. And here's why, because I think it depends on the founder. Something that I have learned over the years, people are very comfortable crying to me. I meet founders in a very vulnerable position often, especially in the earliest days of my business as I was starting to become known as a financial consultant. I would have people come for a free consult and just talk to me like, where are you and how might I be able to support you? And people would be in people who are struggling, like if the operator can see it, the founder knows it too, right? And so I think my answer to this question is going to be to just create space for that founder to talk with you. Maybe schedule a coffee with them and or whatever is appropriate, for the relationship. Say, how are you doing? How
Mhm.
are things going? And create a space that feels safe for them to open up to you and then maybe ask you for help or to be able to provide it. Sometimes, people would pay me for an hour's consult and all they really needed to do was be honest about what was going on behind the scenes. And at the end, they would say, just tell me if I should keep doing this or not. And then we would dig into the numbers and we could have an honest conversation. If you're gonna keep doing this, here are some of the significant changes that you're gonna have to make. Do you have, and here's how much time it's gonna take. But we would never have been able to get there if we went right to the numbers right off the bat. That
Mhm.
makes sense? So
Yeah.
I think space and allowing them to open up is maybe the right first move.
Yeah, meeting them where they are with empathy, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, that's
We
really
kind
good.
of we have a philosophy around here, which is come as you are. Like, no matter what is going on, it's a judgment-free zone. And I think if you're the kind of operator who wants to be able to support founders in the way that you're talking about, making sure that you're creating a culture where people get that and they do trust that that's true. I think that has, for us, created that ability for total strangers to schedule calls with me and be vulnerable and open and honest.
Yeah. Money's a hard thing to talk about. And
Mhm.
people often have a lot of shame and guilt, and it has a lot to do with, I think, how people are brought up around
Mhm.
money, and it is a very sensitive topic. So that mutual trust and creating that safe environment for folks to be vulnerable, as you said, is so important. I agree. Do you see that there's one financial habit that separates businesses that last from those that don't?
You have such a great question. I don't want to be too broad, but I'm gonna say consistency. This is an annoying analogy. I'm sorry, but like, you know how people say like y- with working out or like being fit, right? It's not about going hard and making like quick, fast changes. It's about creating a habit and being consistent. It's one of the most annoying things, but it's true, right? It's like make a plan, commit to the time. And you might listen, like you might miss a financial check-in with your business on a particular week because you had a crazy schedule. You had catering that, all week long and it's so wild and that's okay. But get back on track the next week, right? And be consistent with your check-in, be consistent with your spending goals and targets. It's really just consistency. The founders who make a forecast and check in with that forecast, in my experience, have been the most successful because those who don't are freewheeling it and they don't have a plan and they often are like changing course. I had a client 1 week, this would be her business plan and her business model and her target market. And then 2 weeks later, we'd be somewhere else. And I had to say to her eventually, like, I'm unable to support you because I don't know what we're truly growing to. And we've been unable to make a plan, even though it's okay to change the plan, to pivot, to learn new things and adjust. If we've got nothing laid out in front of us, we have no targets. We have nothing to measure ourselves against. And it's very difficult to be long term successful without that. So, consistency and having some semblance of a plan.
Yep. Yeah, that's so important in so many avenues of like consistency. Okay, final question.
Yeah.
What do you want shared kitchen operators, food business founders, anybody listening to walk away understanding about their own financial lives that they probably aren't thinking about right now?
I'm going to have to just go back to my number one thing, which is know your margin. No, because it is, like I said earlier, it is a predictor of your cash flow, your profitability, and that reliance on outside money to be able to maintain and grow your business. If you don't know for sure what your margins are, figure them out. And if you haven't checked in on them in a while, check in on them because it's such an important, it's like a linchpin piece of your business. So that's always going to be my number one.
Yep. Have that coffee date with your margins.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with us today. Thanks for being on Whisk. This was a great conversation, and I know that our community is really going to value all of your expertise and advice, and we'll link all of your websites and socials in the notes too.
Amazing. This was so fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Whisked. A big thank you to Sarah from the Good Food CFO for that great conversation. You can learn more about the Food Corridor and how our app supports shared kitchen management at thefoodcorridor.com. Book a demo with one of our sales representatives to see how we keep you out of the office and focus on growth. Explore our sister site, The Kitchen Door, to connect with qualified food business leads in your area. For more learning opportunities, be sure to check out kitchenedu.com, our educational hub designed specifically for shared kitchen operators and the businesses they support. Until next time, thanks for being part of the Shared Kitchen community.